Hello, this is the last talk of the conference. Thank you for visiting Microsoft. It's the happiest place on earth. I know that. I used to work at Disneyland, and so I can compare the two. I'm much happier working here than I was for Walt. Chris Anderson is going to help me give this talk because I need to walk around and I can't sit over there. So what we're going to do is spend about 30 minutes talking about modeling and languages. So had this been a management conference, this would have been about modeling and management. So just a quick bit of history. I worked on Indigo, WCF, and we spent a lot of time on having declarative reps of various things we wanted to do in the messaging stack. And as we worked on that project, we realized we were doing things with XSD, WSDL, WS policy, also kind of icky. And we realized that there was a lot of gunk we had to do to go take these, representations of what I wanted to have happen. Like, I want this thing to be secure, right? I want my messages to look like this. To go from how we wanted to write it down so that we could exchange it with other people, to actually how we could get it to cause bits to fly on a CPU and messages fly on a wire. So a bunch of us on the Indigo team started to gradually shift our focus from what Pat Helen used to call HST, which is hooking shit together. And now many of us work on WSD, which is writing shit down. So what this talk is going to be about is the stuff we're doing to enable us to write things down, to basically take the stuff from my brain and put it onto the computer. Seem reasonable, Chris?
I love it.
So, I work on a team that's focused on modeling, as does Chris, my office mate. And, why do we do this? Right? There's two reasons we care about this whole notion of modeling or declarative, whatever. And the two goals are simple. Write less code and understand our software. Right? If we can make whatever we have to do to make these two things happen, that's the goal. Right now we're using the term modeling to characterize our work in the space. But those are the end goals. Right? We hear this from customers over and over and over again. My God, my developers are so unproductive. My God, it takes forever to write this stuff. Right? And once they write it, I don't understand it. I can't figure it out. Right? Those two things we hear from customers all the time. So we're trying to work on, improving the state of the art, as much as we possibly can. It's kind of funny. Chris and I were at a offsite with a bunch of senior folks at the company. And Bill Gates, the current chief software architect, was talking about all these various things he cares about that are really important, missions of the company. One of them was modeling, and he had a bunch of other ones. And I said, "Well, Bill, what's your favorite? They're all your children, but which one's the biggest one?" He goes, "Oh, modeling is so important." And then he said, "Actually, what I mean is write less code." So. Writing less code is something we care about deeply at Microsoft, all the way up to the highest possible levels. Yeah, we care about that too. Yes, we are a commercial venture. So these are the goals. Now let's talk about what we're doing. So the approach that we're working on broadly is basically twofold. To increase the data to code ratio we have in the platform. I'm going to show you some stuff that you'll see we're trying to turn the knob or the pie chart. This is the picture I draw. Right, if I think about your application, some portion of it is code, some portion of it is data. That is, some of it is largely opaque, impenetrable, impervious to most analysis, despite Les Roeder's best attempts. Part of it is transparent and accessible and amenable to many things. And if I look at the platform, there's a very, very distinct pressure to move the pie this way. And that's what we're talking about. So this first bullet is just saying we're trying to increase the data to code ratio in the platform. That is, this is not some 1980s case tool play where we're doing round tripping between your UML diagrams and your code. We'll do some of that too, I'm sure, right? We already do it today. The class designer, even though it's not UML, we have class designer in your source code, and we do a pretty good job keeping them in sync. I kind of like that tool. But really what we're talking about is making the platform just work this way, so that the thing that is on the hard disk and runs is more data than it is code. That's what we're talking about. Second thing is, that data, the way we represent it, turns out to matter a lot. I learned this lesson the hard way. I worked on SOAP and XML schema. The representations of SOAP and XML schema were challenging for people to embrace. Right? They were lovable to a small constituency, but not a broad constituency. And so, I'm not going to get bit by that one again. I care deeply about how things look. If nothing else, working with Chris, who worked on Avalon, this is Chris Anderson, he worked on WPF, he brought the blinking lights aesthetic to me, so I actually care how things look. And so representations matter a whole heck of a lot. Now, no talk on modeling would be complete without a French philosophy slide. Right? I would not be a proper propeller head if I did not utter some philosophical axioms. So here's the way we think about the world. We think about the world as data and interpretation. But we think about them as distinct things. Let's define what they are, because I'm going to use some of these terms in the talk. What's data? It's values devoid of context. That is 3. 3 is data. Context interpretation would be my IQ, the Microsoft stock price, right? That data has very different meaning depending on the interpretation I apply to it, right? So that's kind of the basic thing. And by the way, I am greater than 3 in terms of IQ points. I'm standing on my 2 legs. Yes, I'm greater than 4. Oh, I'm at least 4. Great. And the Microsoft stock price, last time I checked, is very healthy right now. So there are 2 distinct things, the data and the interpretation, and really the fundamental premise here is we're doing this investment so that we can get lots and lots of interpretations on top of the same data. That is, I want the data to exist and be able to do lots of stuff with it. Okay, great. You guys have all fallen asleep. You hate this stuff. Get off this slide. Move. Great. So, how do we move this arc? How do we get this pie to change its balance? We're on a 30-year mission. It's going to take us 30 years to get where I want to be. Good news is we started in 1992. So the platform that I live on, which is the beloved Microsoft platform, has been working harder and harder every year to make this pie more balanced. My favorite example is the slash subsystem. Slash subsystem is the first evidence point I can point to in the Microsoft developer and platform technologies where we've pulled stuff out of the code to do things like console management and inheritance of standard I/O things, and moved it into a declarative form where the platform could actually do the work instead of the developer. So every time you run a compiler and linker on this platform, including csc.exe, including vbc.exe, we write out some data in something called a PE header. And the portable executable header is the thing that wraps all of your managed .NET-y stuff. It is the thing that's known by the low-level subsystems of the loader, of the OS. And slash subsystem allows me to say, when my process starts, I expect to run in a nice console environment, and that I'll have a console available to me. And if I make certain Win32 APIs, various environment will be set up so that I can actually go get the console, do console control. Like if I were going to go write something like Emacs, and I wanted my Emacs to run inside of a console window, I really need that console handle, right? Because I want to do all that terminal control and all that VI kind of like stuff, right? Now, what if I don't? What happens if every time you ran Word, you saw this black window, right? That'd be kind of sucky. So we have the ability for the application to say, I'm one of those kinds of apps that needs all that console-y environment, or I'm not. Don't write a single stitch of code. Take the same code you wrote, you just compile it and link it with the appropriate switches, and the platform reads the data and interprets it appropriately. Now, this is kind of primitive, not very exciting, kind of very Unix-y, right? Let's talk about something that came after that, which is this tool called MakeTypeLib. How many people use MakeTypeLib in their lives? Make typelib was the thing that produced TLBs, which was the binary data format we had for describing COM libraries. And that data was far more rich than just I need a console handle, but rather it said, here are the types that are in my DLL. Here are the things one can instantiate. Here's any number of things I might care about. And this, of course, enabled Visual Basic and a bunch of other things. It enabled our marshalling system to be able to take that description and take my stack frames and remote them across context boundaries. It enabled a whole bunch of stuff.
Truly a beautiful thing.
I can't believe we're saying truly a beautiful thing.
Right.
This is ODL. Remember, make typelib was the
Yeah.
ODL compiler. Strangely enough, we worked for the guy who wrote this.
Yeah, I can't correct.
Transaction required. The next step. I want to do transaction processing. I don't want to have to do manual management of transactions. So we invented the transaction required attribute in MTS in 1996. Right? Again, pulling that functionality out of the code and putting it into data. Finally, at the turn of the century,
the high point of development.
Yeah, we did this thing called WSDL, and we did this other thing called XLang. WSDL was a chance for us to write down what the description of the outside of your service was. And so WSDL does its best, and granted, it ain't perfect. We can do a lot better now knowing what we know now than what we knew then. But WSDL was the way we described the outsides of these services we wanted to go right. But more interestingly, we had this thing called XLang. And XLang was the way we described the insides of our services. And XLang, for those of you who don't remember, was a process language based on the Pi calculus that we use in our product called BizTalk. And we then later on took that technology and those ideas, worked with IBM to come up with this thing called BIPL for WUS, also known as Business Process Execution Language. So these two things were us really trying to get to a place where we had a data rep that described the whole enchilada. And in theory, one could write an entire application with those pointy brackets that Ted Neward so allergically reacts to, and we'll talk about that in a second. We had a fair amount of functionality here. So this was kind of like the turn of the century, kind of the end of that whole COM unmanaged era. And as you all know, in 2000 we introduced it and we shipped it in 2002. We said this idea of having data next to the code is so useful, we added attributes. Right? So the CLR metadata format is extensible. We said we want to make this available to everyone, and so you can write fairly interesting programs completely in attributes, provided you have a reasonable interpretation on top of them. And attributes were a really big advance. They were a great feature. Obviously, people have a lot of affection for them. They're catching on outside of the Microsoft space. But yes, question.
There was another thing that was really great about that O2 release.
What was it? What else was great about the O2 release?
What else? What else was in the .NET release that allowed for multiple interpretations of data?
Well, Chris, I don't know. Why don't you tell me?
I.O.
Yes, you're right. We up-leveled the abstraction for the way we write down the actual executable instruction set.
Move that line a little bit.
And it moved the line a little bit, and it enabled a variety of things, including garbage collection. You're right. Do you have any other things you'd like to add, Chris, since you've decided to talk in this talk?
Well, I figured I was now allowed to since you made an error. That was really, I was waiting for your first project.
Oversight and error are two different things.
Oh, you're right. No, keep going. Carry on.
So it turns out that you can put a whole bunch of stuff in CLR attributes, right? Allow multiple gives you the ability to have sequences, and you can already have records. So you could actually encode all of JSON in CLR attributes because we have atoms, records, and sequences. And when Chris worked on Avalon, he considered that. The Avalon team, up until the Longhorn schedule change, was probably doing the whole WPF window hierarchies written entirely in CLR attributes. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
We're lying because there's press in the room. I was being facetious in case it wasn't obvious. So they could have done that. They could have said, yeah, we have a way to write stuff down. Sure, let's just shove all this crap into CLR attributes and call it a day. Instead, they invented this thing called XAML. And it turns out XAML says, okay, great, we're not going to use the code as the centerpiece and the IL and CLR metadata format as the centerpiece. Rather, we're going to put significant parts of the application in a different data rep, using a different data model and using a different syntax. Now, the interesting thing about XAML was it is very closely aligned with our programming language technology. So I have a variety of ways in which I can write interpretations, including the one I actually want,
yes.
which is I can just write C# classes or VB classes. Now, it turns out that everyone knows about the content control, which is the thing Chris worked on, but there's other stuff too. In that same release, 2006, which was .NET 3.0, we also shipped this thing called the workflow engine. And the workflow engine said, great, I love all that windowy stuff, fine. Somebody else is going to go work on that. I want to be able to write down arbitrary execution policy as data. And so, yes, I can write a procedural application. I have if an iteration, so I could do that in WebF. But it turns out we shipped two very interesting runtimes with a XAML rep. One is the state machine schema, which allows me to write an automata-based program. And the other one is the policy schema, which is the way I write rules. So I have a way of writing forward-chained rule sets completely in XAML. I have the ability to write automata in XAML. And we can just run these directly on the platform. Right? By the way, all of these things, we shipped runtimes that just load them up directly and do stuff with them, to be clear.
By the way, I just have to point out one thing. I love this thing, which is in 06 we did the equivalent of WSDL for definitions for your UI, and then the process.
Yes, yeah, very interesting.
I like it.
And in 2008, as many of you know, we finally got quote in our languages here at Microsoft. So those of you who can read this, which is Visual Basic's way of saying tick, we got there. So this is the platform premise. Right, you can see that we've been slowly putting more and more of your app into data and less of it into code. Doesn't mean the code's ever going to go away. We're just trying to get this balance just right. Let's say a few things about representations. You know, the modeling community, it's been interesting. I mean, I never thought I'd have a career in modeling. You know, my parents used to say, Don, that's really your future, but who knew? You know, the modeling community is really big into two things. Pictures, they love pictures, and they love the term meta, right?
Meta pictures?
I don't know if they have meta pictures. Turns out pictures are useful, right? 1,000 pictures is worth one line of good declaration. Sometimes the picture is the best way to write something down. Sometimes it's not. Turns out we also like schematized data. Our runtimes love schematized data, right? All those examples I saw on the previous slide all have a structured representation that is easily loaded and traversed at runtime. Loading Visio and traversing the object model for your boxes and lines. We could do that, but it's not really optimized for that. Yet, many people don't want to open up their CLR metadata in a binary hex editor and just edit it that way. And we also love grammars over text. Ted Neward is right. Angle brackets aren't for everyone.
Wait. Can you say that one more time?
Angle brackets are not for everyone. Ted Neward is right?
Yeah, we so rarely.
Oh, you're just not, it sounded... Great, fine. Turns out, I love XML as much as a man can love a technology. I defy you to find someone who loves a technology as much as I love XML. Turns out not everybody does. And you know what? We're here to make a lot of people productive on this platform. And saying, yes, first open the WSDL file, type open angle bracket, and see what happens. Isn't necessarily going to be a path to success. So we care deeply about having natural ways to write things down in a text file that are not only natural to write, but more importantly, natural to read. Because I have two reasons to write shit down. One is to tell the computer, do what I want, until I can do the Scotty moment where I pick up the mouse and say, computer, I need to put it into data and give it to it. Second reason I need is to go tell other people. I just did a design and I want Chris Ann to fall in love with it. Right? First thing I do is I open up some text file and I show him the most concise, direct fragment of text I can possibly get to make my point. Great. We love them all. To have a great story on our platform for modeling, we need to have excellent technologies on all of these fronts. So they're all important. So, what are we doing? I showed you up to 2008, and guess what? It's 2008. Are we done? No, there's a lot more to do. We're definitely spending time on, many divisions at Microsoft are spending time trying to move this Some of the things that have been problematic have been, I really want to be able to write it without compiling, right? And the DLR folks obviously care about it from one angle. But there's any number of other reasons why we want to be able to just load this data directly. So we're building stuff that allows us to get more and more of this stuff into structured data. And I'll show you a concrete example of that in a second. The other thing is, you know what? We got a lot of data processing machinery floating around that we aren't using, right? I've got all this data. How can I walk up to my machine and say, find all the types that exist on my hard disk? How do I do that? You go to Program Files, Reference Assemblies. You go to Microsoft. You go to Systems. You go to Windows/Microsoft.net/framework, and then you Splunk, and blah, blah, blah. You guys know this if you ever worked on our platform, right? It'd be nice if we use some of this search technology and indexing so I could actually go off and look up stuff very efficiently. Also, we need more diversity in tooling. Having all of this data unlocks the ability for people to tool, right? Lutz Roeder could not have written Reflector in the old days, right? Doing dump bin/exports and saying, that CDLL is really interesting. Look at all these function names you've got. Sure, he could have written it, but who would have cared? Right now, he's an international programming superstar. Why? Because we gave him all that data so that he could go write that tool using just public APIs and public formats. Primarily public formats. Cool. This is what's next. Now, stop, Chris. Hands off the keyboard. One last thing I want to say. You know, Chris and I work on a lot of declarative technologies for the runtime. And, you know, Bill Gates sees this stuff. Everybody does build reviews. He's seen this stuff a million times. Great, declarative this. And his standard question is always, could I write PowerPoint in it? Right? I mean, there's some very famous declarative programming technologies, and they have all this great architecture. And, you know, Bill always says, well, can I write PowerPoint in it? So what I decided to do is, using our declarative technologies, take 1 hour before this talk and write PowerPoint. So what we're seeing here is a declarative app I wrote at 2:30 to give this talk at 3:30. Now you may say, Don, how long did it take? I said, it took me half an hour, right? Because the declarative technologies were so good, I was able to write this entire app in half an hour. So you know what I did with the other half hour? I wrote the talk. So declarative technologies have transformed my life. I was able to write not only a talk, but the technology to give the talk in only an hour. And to prove this, Chris.
All those years beforehand, we built the platform. That doesn't count.
Yeah. I'm standing on the toes of giants, so I can see just slightly over their heads. Great. So, Chris, would you go to Visual Studio? Just Alt-Tab to VS.
Jeez.
Hit yes to all. So what I'd like you to do is go to lang.net.xaml. That's not it. lang.net.xaml. Here's the talk. This is the talk I gave you. And for what it's worth, I wrote this file independent of the code. So I just said, here's kind of what I want it to look like. And this is just the stuff I want to write down, because I'm all about writing shit down. Right? So I wrote this talk this way. And it's a XAML file. And then I said, well, geez, I want to have an interpretation of it so I can go build that PowerPoint app. So I built an interpretation after the fact, which is in schema.cs. And you'll see schema.cs is a simple schema written using C#. Now, yes, it's got some noise in there I don't really care about. Like the fact I have to new up an observable list to make it work. That's kind of a nuisance. And you know what? We're working to make that easier. Right? But today, this is the way the XAML stack works. This is the way our platform works. So I had to write a little bit of gunk to make it work. Honestly, I wish I could have written a XAML-based schema for this instead, because it would have been much more direct in what I was doing. It'd be great to have a XAML-based schema language with runtime support for it.
That'd be a great place.
Yeah. So here's this thing. And then I said, well, geez, that's a great way to get it into memory and let the CLR do monkey business with it. But then the next thing I want to do is actually display it. So if you go to window1.xaml, which is the far left, you'll see I basically used a content control, which is another manifestation of this multiple interpretations on top of data. Content controls in WPF, in case you don't know, allow me to apply the interpretation, that is the rendering of it, as a separate piece of data from the actual use of the data. Now in this case, because I hit Don doesn't know how to program WPF very well, I'm actually embedding the data template underneath the content control. I tried adding it to windows.resources, and it failed miserably because I didn't have you here, Chris. But you can see this is the way I wrote the layout. It's just some XAML.
You reviewed my book. It's just.
Yes.
Doesn't sink in, does it?
No, I have a limited cache size. So here's the data, and check this out. Chris, could you go to the Notepad file? Actually, no. Actually, what's cool is hover over this stuff. Notice that our text assets in Visual Studio know about XAML and are able to do things like, when I hover over, tell me what the name of the underlying type is. And if this thing were not in read-only mode because it's running under the debugger, I could go in and actually edit it with IntelliSense, right? Cool. And then finally, Chris, could you go to, you can see the IntelliSense, just don't hit save. You're right. Can you go to that Notepad file where we can make edits, and just hit Control, just scroll to the bottom, and just hit Control Z, or you want to type a new concept in at the bottom? Or at the top? What do you, dude, Chris, this is your window of creativity in my talk that was booked under my name, that it was asked for me to give. I'm just setting you up, dude. Go, 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 go. Shine, shine, my friend. Shine, my crazy diamond. Great. So Chris is going to put a new concept up here. Yes, 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 yes. Do you have anything else you would like to say in this file?
Oh, yeah.
You know, we have this thing called the empty tag where you could have just written this. Don't.
Too much typing?
Yeah, too much typing. This angle bracket, I'm getting a Ted Neward moment.
Okay, great. Cool.
So just go to the top one and write it. The window of creativity is just collapsed. Cool. And now go back to the PowerPoint thingy. Hit F5. Sweet.
Excellent.
My PowerPoint is so great, I don't have to stop presentation mode to make edits. Anyway, there you go. All right, fine. So Mahesh is giving me the hook. This is the end of the talk. And I have time for exactly one question. Yes? It's so 80s. SAP's been doing this for ages.
Right. Next Step did it back in the 90s. They had a special format for it. So what's the next frontier or generation? Because we've seen this kind of data-driven programming before. What's upcoming? What's new?
What's new?
Or will be new? Or what's being researched? Am I giving you too much of a hard time?
No, I'm trying to process.
Okay.
And filter. We're trying to make what we've got better. Certainly the capabilities we've already got, we need to do a better job at. I look at our existing platform, the stuff we shipped in 2006, and I see a lot of warts. I see a lot of warts that I really want to see us fix. And a lot of us are working on fixing those. So there are so many things that, man, it's so close. I wish we could do it better, right? Just to get the platform hygiene to where we want it to be. We got a lot of work to do. Right? We have, centuries worth of work, just to get the current capabilities to a place where they're where we want them, to where they're as simple and and where they're as simple as something like /subsystem. Right now, I look at that XAML file, and it doesn't pass my 2 beer test, right? I didn't have 2 beers before the talk, so I was able to do this. Had I had 2 beers, I would not have been able to write that XAML. Ultimately, we want things to pass a 2 beer test. We want people to be able to say, yeah, I'm thinking about a lot of things. Sure, let me go write this.
Does that mean coming up with something better than XML?
God, yes.
Thank you.
Yes. If that's all you want to know, yes. If I have to get up and say, you're going to write all your programs in an XML format, I can't do that much longer. It was a great way to bootstrap.
Yeah, well, and I'll say one thing also, which is XML does provide a great machine record. It's just a horrible human record.
Yes. And remember, what we're doing has 2 sides. Telling the machine what you need and telling other humans what you're thinking.
Well, even as a machine rep, it's pretty bloated with the double tags, for example. Yeah. JSON, for example, is much more efficient. And
yeah, I love JSON too. And had that been around when we did so, that would have happened, but it didn't. And yes, S expressions are even better. Yes, octet sequence is so much better. Great. Well, thanks. Great. So Do you want to say some? You want to tee up the next thing? I bet we're going to the company store.
Yeah, so surveys, if you filled them out, if you have filled them out, please give them to Christy. If you haven't, fill them out and then give them to Christy. Shuttles are outside for the company store if you want to go. Other than that, I think we should just give a round of applause to all the speakers. The past 3 days, this has been really great. I've had a lot of fun, though I've just been recording. I'm going to get to watch everything again and experience it like you guys did. I hope you had fun, and have a good day. Thanks for coming.